I thought I would talk about three rock documentaries that I watched recently. One of which I'd seen before, the other two I had not. And all three of them were really good for different reasons. The first one that I watched was based on, or was a documentary on this female band, early 70s, came out of LA, but they're mostly Korean American women. And the band is called Fanny. Now, I had never heard of Fanny until honestly a few years ago, maybe when they were putting out their reunion record or when that documentary was being made. And I hadn't really checked them out. I might have checked out like a song or two and it didn't really register with me and I turned it off, but I certainly never listened to an album all the way through or anything like that. But I was very curious about them once I started seeing clips of this documentary and hearing about it and seeing people talk about it and message boards and all that. I really enjoyed the documentary. It's really interesting. It has a lot of archival footage, deals with Fanny back in the 70s, and just it's crazy to me how many choices they made because of record companies. The big one being letting go one of the founding members because a record company was basically dangling the contract in front of them, saying, "If you don't do it, we're not going to sign you." And just thinking about how often that must happen, and of course all the obstacles they had because they were women touring, probably with record contracts and the like. And they never really made it. They had several lineup changes. They changed their sound quite a bit by the time they broke up, I believe, in the early 80s or late 70s. I can't say that the music does a whole lot for me. It seems kind of like generic rock from the 70s. I'm probably going to explore it a little bit further, but I thought the story was really interesting. I thought just their struggle to keep it going, different members leaving, like the original one at the behest of the record company, and then coming back years later and joining the band. And then it was really cool how they were working on a new record at the time, and a comeback record after years and years of being apart and doing different things. So I thought that was really cool, and then just how excited they were about it. I won't spoil the documentary or anything, how it ends. I really enjoyed it. And definitely an interesting story and a unique one, and a lot of things I hadn't really thought about, not only being women, but also being Korean American in the early 70s. And I mean, I just laughed at the name before, like Fanny. Is there really a female group named Fanny? And I know in the UK, it's like, it's a little bit more offensive, but highly recommend the documentary. I found it on Kanopy. It's one of those services that you can use your library card to essentially rent movies. The other one I want to talk about, or I've got two more to talk about. I watched the other day. I kind of had a double feature documentaries on St. Patrick's Day. And the first one, obviously, you can probably guess what it is, or you'd probably be in the ballpark if you name, I would imagine, if you think of three documentaries, or artists that would probably have documentaries, one of them is going to be this guy, and that is Shane MacGowan. This is If I Should Fall from Grace. This was a documentary that was put out in 2001, 2002. And I like it better than Crock of Gold, which came out a few years ago. The problem I had with Crock of Gold is there's just way too much Johnny Depp, and it seemed to celebrate his alcoholism and just, kind of, it's one of those stories where, making people think, oh, he writes those great songs because he's doing drugs, because he's all screwed up. And I don't tend to like that as much as being a little bit more real. And this one was a little bit more real. Interviewed his parents, a lot of people that were involved in his life, former Pogues members quite a bit. And there's a lot of footage. And, I've been kind of a casual Pogues fan. I got into them with If I Can Fall from Grace with God, and Rum Sodomy and the Lash is the one that I really liked. But heard a lot of interesting, really early songs and live footage that I hadn't seen before, and then even some later songs, and definitely makes me want to explore, or actually probably just buy on vinyl some of those records that I had back in the day and dive into them a little bit more. My girlfriend's pretty into them. We have some records, but definitely need to be a little bit more completist, I think, on the Pogues. I saw Shane MacGowan and the Popes in Madison, Wisconsin. I looked it up recently because I couldn't remember, like, was it before or after this documentary? It would have been after. So probably a few more teeth were missing at the time before he got his new teeth. But the thing I remember the most is waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And it was a pretty small club. It's called Luther's Blues. And I think everybody, like half the people left or something. And we were getting really intoxicated. We were up super, super close. I mean, we were probably in the front row. I remember when he finally showed up, and everybody's like, he's not going to show up. He didn't. There were all these stories about he didn't get the paperwork right for immigration, or the bus broke down, or he passed out. I mean, it's just like nothing seemed concrete about why he wasn't there. Well, of course, we probably know he's just, you know, a little screwed up, or a lot screwed up. But what I remember most about that show is just him being completely trashed and hardly being able to stand up. I do remember lighting some cigarettes for him. That was kind of cool. I looked back at this set list and I was like, wow, that was such a good set list. A lot of stuff from the first solo record and the second one too, but quite a few Pogues songs as well. But I think I might have been, I mean, not even half as gone as Shane. For me, it would have been just alcohol, but I don't remember that quite so clearly, that show, probably because we were waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for the guy. I mean, I swear it was like 2 hours after he was supposed to be on. But anyway, this documentary I find really interesting, If I Should Fall from Grace with God. It's not spectacularly edited or anything. It's a little choppy, and some of the interviews with him are really, really hard to understand. You kind of got to, well, I don't know, turn on the subtitles or something to hear them. But yeah, it's great. It's a good documentary. The other one I want to talk about, the last one, ended up being a double feature because we were getting out our DVDs and we didn't even have our DVD player hooked up. And that is Color Me Obsessed, a film about the Replacements. Now, this is the one I had seen in the movie theater in Minneapolis when it came out, and it's super unique if you haven't seen it. It's all about the Replacements, about how these obsessed fans and people that just love the shit out of them. A lot of people in Minneapolis and elsewhere, but mostly Minneapolis, just talking about the love of this band, how they're just obsessed with this band, how this band was so different, how they're so rock and roll and so unique and so talented. And of course, sharing all kinds of stories, crazy ones, bad shows, good shows, you know, drunken antics, all kinds of stuff. But what's so unique about it is it doesn't use any footage at all. It doesn't even use any pictures of the musicians, the members of the Replacements, or even album covers when they talk about album covers. Until the very, very end, you see some pictures. And, you know, it's kind of like those cheap, well, not really, it's way better. But those cheap, you know, movies that you see on Bob Dylan documentaries or Neil Young, you know, Undercover, the early years, that kind of stuff. I'm sure, you know, he didn't want to get the rights, or maybe he just didn't care. It almost seems like he just wanted to do this style. I think he did, and didn't even bother going down that road. But it's a really interesting documentary, just the way it's done. You know, I can imagine somebody that doesn't know them at all just being so intrigued when it was over to finally like play a Replacements record. But it's super well done. I think this is probably only the second time I've seen it. I bought this set that's got two CDs or two DVDs on it, but I think the second one is the only one that I'd ever watched after I bought it, and that's got all the extras, extended interviews that they did with Grant Hart and Greg Norton from Husker Du and other people that were involved in the movie. But really, really good movie. Just love a rock and roll. Can't recommend this one enough, especially if you're a Replacements fan. I mean, I would assume you've already seen it, but even if you're a very casual one or just a fan of rock and roll, it's super cool how he did this documentary. And I'm gonna look for his name here, or Gorman Bechard. And he's pretty talented. He's done other documentaries too. I'm not going to think of them off the top of my head. Although there is one he did on Grant Hart. He was so impressed with Grant Hart from Husker Du after all the interviews for Color Me Obsessed that he ended up doing another movie on Grant Hart. But if you're looking for some documentaries, I don't know. I didn't check on Color Me Obsessed if you can stream it somewhere. I would not be surprised at all if it's just straight up on YouTube. And I think probably the Pogues one might be too. The Fanny one, like I said, we saw it on Kanopy, a cool app that you can just use your library card to rent movies and use libraries. Use libraries before we don't have libraries anymore. You never know these days. So there's several documentaries that I love. These are 3 that we watched recently, and all 3 I'd really recommend. Fanny, The Replacements, Color Me Impressed, and the one on Shane MacGowan, which is called If I Should Fall from Grace. So thanks, everyone.